America's role in the operation. House Speaker John Boehner sent a letter to President Obama today complaining that military resources were committed without the president clearly explaining to Congress what the mission is. Then there's the cost. Using figures from the Navy, CNN estimates the U.S. will spend $800 million to establish the no-fly zone over Libya, and after that, $100 million a week to maintain it. Beyond the price tag, there's political, philosophical criticism. Richard Haass is the president of the Council on Foreign Relations, the former chief advisor to Secretary of State Colin Powell. Richard Haass joins me now in New York. And we could talk about, I know you don't think there were vital interests at stake in terms of getting the U.S. involved, and we're kind of getting involved in the fly. Let's talk about where we move forward from here, since we are involved in this. How do you see the operation going, and what are your biggest concerns now?
Well, you're right. We are where we are, whether you thought this was a great idea or a terrible idea. My hunch is the operation will take longer than people think. It almost always does. Plus, the opposition is almost better seen as a plural rather than as a singular organized fighting force. They really weren't prepared for something like this. The allies really weren't coordinated much among themselves, much less with the opposition. So I think you've probably got to prepare for something that could be quite messy and quite prolonged.
When President Obama says, you know, days, not weeks, in terms of U.S. Leadership on this, or U.S. the most prominent role in this, do you buy that?
Well, let me put it this way. If he's right, then someone else had better be prepared to step in. Could be the Arab League, but that's a long shot. Could be the French or some other European. But you are ultimately going to need either an awful lot of military help on behalf of the opposition, and then if you succeed, you're going to need probably some kind of a peacekeeping force, because there's going to be a security vacuum. Because the one thing we could probably predict, that if the opposition ever does get rid of Gaddafi, then their one common thread will have disappeared. And for all we know then, they'll start fighting among themselves. So you're going to have to provide some sort of national order, because Gaddafi never allowed an army to really grow up that has a national reach. This is, even if we're successful, this is going to be extraordinarily messy.
Well, you know, there are people say, look, we know who the opposition is. I look at the makeup of the council that's running Benghazi now, that they are, you know, doctors, some former government people, the secularists. Do you buy that, or do you feel like we don't really know who really is the opposition?
No, because in civil wars, the people who are active at the political level aren't necessarily the people who really have the power. Plus, in Libya, you've got an unbelievably complicated mosaic, an overlay of tribes and families and the rest. So I think anyone who speaks with any confidence that we know what would succeed Gaddafi, if in fact Gaddafi were to fall or fail, I simply don't buy it.
So do you not see this as a democratic uprising that just turned violent, or do you see this as a civil war that the U.S. is now siding with one group in a civil war?
Absolutely the latter. This is a civil war. Whether you think it was humanitarian intervention or not, this is a civil war. We have sided with one side, the opposition to Gaddafi. We don't know exactly who it is we're siding with. We certainly don't know who on the side we're working with would prevail in the end. And again, civil wars are nasty. And often the people who come to the fore are not people who necessarily are reading, you know, the Federalist Papers. And
could anything be worse, though, than Gaddafi? I mean, a guy who, you know, has been, Fawad Ajami says he's run the place like a penal colony.
As bad as he's been, and as bad as he could be, sure. You could have situations of massive chaos. You could have people come to the fore who are, say, aligned with various Islamic radical groups. You could have a central government that doesn't control big chunks of the territory.
Right. Essentially, before Gaddafi, there were sort of three main areas that made up Libya. It really wasn't much of a country.
Right. I mean, you could have ungoverned spaces, to use the wonkish term, where groups like Al-Qaeda could put down roots. So yeah, as bad as things are, you know, one of my few rules of the Middle East is things have to get worse before they get even worse. They don't necessarily improve. So sure, I can spin out scenarios where things in Libya get better, but I think we've also got to be prepared for the fact that things could get worse, that Gaddafi could prevail. He could simply hang in for a long time, or even if the opposition were to prevail and oust him, that's not the end of things. That's really simply the beginning of phase 2, and that could be extraordinarily complicated.
So bottom line for you is this operation is going to take a lot longer than people have been led to believe.
Whatever the U.S. phase is, the operation, until Libya is functioning as a normal country that in any way is a positive place, that could be a matter of years.
Can you see a situation where Gaddafi remains in power and this operation ends?
Sure. He could hang tough. By and large, if governments stay intact and are willing to kill their own people, they can remain in place. And then the international community would have to decide whether to escalate. And we don't know whether the Arab League or all the Europeans in the United States would be willing to escalate. The president said he wants Gaddafi to go, which is quite ambitious, but he also said no American boots on the ground. Right now, we have a disconnect between the ambition of our goals and the limits on our means. And unless someone else is willing to provide those additional means, sure, it's quite possible that Gaddafi could survive, or you simply have a standoff. You can imagine Libya fighting this out for some time to come.
Richard Haass, appreciate you being on. Raising a lot of